we do have some time at the end. And just to let everybody know, the session is being recorded today, and we'll make that available after the session. So I wanted to go ahead and get started. I will just want to welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about dream mentoring. This is a term that Mary has coined, and I love it. It talks about diverse, reverse, equitable, actionable mentoring and how it can help your employees and your organization move forward. Before we get started, I just want to introduce myself, and I'll let Mary introduce herself. I'm Jodi Petersen. I know some of you, but not all of you on the call. Prior to starting MentorStrat, I led the enterprise mentoring program for a Fortune 50 company. And my primary focus was on the strategy development, the design and launch of impactful mentoring programs that were aligned with that organization's top talent management and DEI objectives. We started this organization, Mary and I, about a year ago. And so we are working with clients today, helping them do what we were doing at our organizations: design, launch, scale high quality, sustainable mentoring programs that really work for your organization. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but I want to give Mary a chance to introduce herself.
Thanks, Jodi. So I'm Mary Schlegel. I've been working in learning and development for the last 9 years, working on global talent management teams for large Fortune 500 companies, as well as on learning and development as a sole person on startups, early stage startups, and at startup accelerators. So my role in learning and development has been fought through a lot of different environments, and I really love all of the opportunities I've had to learn about what works in different companies and what doesn't. And I think that's a huge part of what Jodi and I also do, is making sure that we're looking at mentoring and learning and development in general from each company's lens, which I think is one of the most exciting things as well, is getting a chance to understand what the unique challenges are and how to overcome them and support your employees and your organization. So really excited today to get a chance to talk to you about this specific type of mentoring, how I've led programs at other places, the results we've seen, and why it's so valuable and how you could use it in your organization.
Great, thanks, Mary. Before we dive into Mary's content today, if you want to just jump over to the next slide, Mary. I want to talk to you a little bit about, Mary alluded to this a little bit too, is that we really want to look at mentoring from your organization's lens. We understand that no two organizations are alike. Each has its own culture, its own talent development and DEI needs, its own heartbeat, if you will. So we believe that while all organizations can benefit from mentoring, one size doesn't fit all. And that's why we don't sell out of the box mentoring solutions. And so I want to make sure that you understand today the content that Mary is going to present is a framework for which you can establish this type of mentoring within your organization. But it's not an out of the box solution. And I want to talk a little bit about how we help organizations develop the solutions that are right for them. So we use this 5-step mentoring process and really just bring all of our years of experience, our best practices that we've learned along the way, and industry best practices to work for you. We use the 5-step process. The first step is align. We work with you to understand your organization's top talent management and DEI needs, and then we align your programs to help you solve those problems. Large organizations likely need multi-mentoring experiences, so multiple small programs under the enterprise umbrella. You can think about them in relationship to diversity programs, career programs, and skill development programs is kind of how we like to think about it. Really ensuring that all or nearly all of the employees in your organization have access to mentoring. It's a vision that we created right when we started the company is we believe everyone should have access to mentoring, and it shouldn't just be reserved for top level leaders. And so that's really our vision for the organization. organization. When we help you design the program, so the next step, we're really trying to be intentional about the structure, the schedule, the matching, who the participants are that are going to be in your program, to help you get the maximum impact for your employees in your organization. We help you carefully plan for launch by evaluating the participant needs to engage and be successful. It's really important that mentors and mentees have adequate training in mentoring basics, developing those mentoring core skills, and key diversity and inclusion themes. Some of those would be like practicing communication skills in a cross-cultural context, understanding cultural and gender biases, and training really helps those relationships be, the research shows, up to 2.5 times more successful. And that's why we have focused time in developing our e-learning platform, MentorStrat Academy, and we can share more with that about that later. The next step is the fourth step is guide. So a common mistake that companies make when they're launching programs is to launch them without any support for participants. They match people together, and I always say, throw them out to the wild to let them do whatever. We help you develop a plan to guide your participants along their mentoring journey with information, resources, and tools that they need to be successful depending on the design of your program, because we know that that's how those relationships can be more impactful for the participants and for your company. We also help set those participants up with a mentoring community so that you can leverage the internal momentum and guidance from mentoring champions within your organization. And then finally, we're really intentional about designing a mentoring experience that aligns with your key measures for success. So we help you evaluate those qualitative and quantitative data that comes out of your program, and the participant outcomes, so that you can provide a clear and complete narrative of your program to your key stakeholders. And so those are our services in a nutshell. At the end of the presentation, there'll be a QR code on the screen. If you would like a custom consultation with us, you can use that code to book time. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Mary and dive into our topic, dream mentoring.
All right, awesome. So thank you, Jodi. And again, as Jodi said, if you have any questions, feel free to add them into the chat. Jodi's going to be monitoring it and either jump in and interject and ask the question during the flow of the presentation, or we're going to reserve it for the end where we'll have time to go through those as well. So what's dream mentoring? Dream mentoring programs are a unique type of reverse mentoring where senior leaders are mentored by more junior or younger employees of differing backgrounds, experiences, identities, etc., on topics of strategic and cultural relevance. And the goal here is to empower current and future leaders and build more equitable workspaces. So before we dive deeper into the program itself, I want to take a step back and consider the current environment we find ourselves in and explore why this is so valuable at this specific juncture. So Klaus Schwab, executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, also the creator of the World Economic Forum and the author of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, said that there's never been a time of greater promise or potential peril. But he warned that today's decision makers are often trapped in linear traditional thinking, and that they need to expand their perspectives and reconnect with people and values if they want to succeed in the future. So if this sounds a little bit dramatic, never been a time of greater promise or potential peril, let's take a look at what's actually going on in the world today and what created this sentiment. So obviously we're at a unique intersection. I'm sure I don't have to explain much about why these times are so interesting and evolving and confusing, but we're at a collision point between the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We're seeing AI come more and more into the fold with ChatGPT and a million other technological advances. We have shifting employee and consumer demographics as Gen Z and millennials become a bigger part, not just of the workforce, but of the consumer base. And obviously we have COVID, which we're coming towards the end of, but it's really changed how we're going to live and work from here on out. Each of these individually has brought its own changes and challenges, but together They've accelerated the need for digitalization. They've redefined employee and consumer expectations, and they've sparked and fanned social revolutions. We've seen many people retire earlier than expected, leaving a vacuum of skills and institutional knowledge in senior roles. And others who had to delay retirement may stay longer, but not be looking to take on new challenges. At the same time, Gen Z and millennials have been reacting to change in different ways, gaining new skills, ramping up their side hustle, or delaying entering the workforce due to hiring freezes during the pandemic or the uncertainty of the current economy. And to look at the estimated change before COVID, we see that there was so much that we were expected to have to compensate for even before COVID hit. So LinkedIn reported that between 2020 and 2025, 85 million jobs would be lost and 97 million new ones would be created. And again, that's pre-COVID. So these numbers are probably very underestimated. 2025 is a year and a half away. And in the same period, nearly 50% of the required skills for a particular job are expected to change. Do you have the same job that you did in 2020? I wonder how much those skills that you need have changed. And if you were to apply for the same job, how different it might look from that job description that you had a few years ago. And it doesn't make it any easier that the half-life of a skill is only 5 years and shrinking. It makes it really difficult to stay on top of our jobs, of our skill sets, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. And with the Great Reshuffle, we saw a lot of people contemplating leaving the workforce. We saw a lot of women and women of color leave the corporate workforce. And we've also seen that many people are reevaluating how they want to work, who they want to work for, as well as seeing that freelance and other non-traditional types of working arrangements are increasing and set to be about 60% of the workforce freelancing in some way or another by 2030. So all of this, a lot of change, might be a little bit overwhelmed right now, but I want to talk about briefly what exactly is the makeup of our workforce right now. So I want you to reflect on, feel free to put it in the chat or just think to yourself, what percentage of the population, the workforce globally, are Gen Z and millennials? Well, Gen Z and millennials, according to the World Economic Forum, are already half of the workforce today, and they're estimated to make up 75% of the workforce in just 7 years. And if we think that this is a big change, I also want to take a look at how our consumer numbers are changing. So while millennials, they represent the largest group of consumers, and baby boomers still have the largest buying power, but Gen Z spending is on the rise. By 2030, Gen Z will out-earn millennials worldwide, and they already command $360 billion in disposable income, according to Bloomberg. That's more than the GDP of Israel or Singapore or Ireland. And if it were a country, it would be the 31st highest GDP in the world. And the thing that makes this especially important for companies to understand is that if a member of Gen Z doesn't agree with the morals of a company, many of them are comfortable finding alternatives and boycotting the products completely and getting their friends to do so as well. So what we've learned about Gen Z and millennials, I think a lot of us still think, we still get hung up on how to manage millennials who are now in positions of power, but we need to also be thinking about this new generation, Gen Z, that's coming in, again, not just in the workforce, but also is making up an increasing part of our consumer base. And by the way, of Gen Z, at least this is specifically in the US, nearly 50% are people of color, and a third in the US are immigrants or children of immigrants. And the way that they fundamentally are looking at the world and seeing how they are represented, how their loved ones, their friends are represented, is impacting the way that they engage in the workforce and in the marketplace. This generation is highly involved in social and political causes. Half consider themselves activists, which is another layer. It's not just that they're advocates, they're fans, they're activists. They see it as part of their own identity to take a stand and stand for what they believe in. They're not afraid, again, to boycott products and companies and replace them with competitors. And they use both their spending and their employment to advocate for what they believe in. So again, this impacts who they work for and who they buy from. So another question for you, what % of Gen Z do you think would work for a company that does not share their values? According to global research by Lewis, a researching firm, only 1 in 5 would work for a company that does not share their values. That's a pretty low amount of individuals. And when I say share their values, I don't just mean what a company puts on their value statement. They are looking at how they treat the world, how they treat other people, and the actual impacts and results. They don't just want a nice statement from a company, they actually want to see the receipts. So to recap all of this so that we can get into Dream, it would seem that Klaus Schwab was right, that in the end, it all does go back to people and values. If your organization wants to succeed, you need employees. And if you need employees, you need millennials and Gen Z. And if you want to get millennials and Gen Z, you need to be aware of and align with their values and their evolving expectations around leadership, diversity, sustainability, and what work means to them. Oops, I want to go back really quick. Their disposable wealth grows and they become larger forces driving the economic marketplace. And as millennials and Gen X continue to take a bigger part in financial decisions because they're caretakers for both their loved ones who are older as well as for their children and their charges under them, they're also going to be exerting more and more power and looking at the choices that they make through these different generational and environmental lenses. And so to market to them, you have to understand, again, their expectations, their values, and the role that those values play. So I wonder how many of you, if you are confident, or if you could, share to what degree you think you're confident that you know what Gen Z and millennials, or just, people entering the workforce now, what they want and need. Feel free to put that in the chat, and I'd love to come back to that later. But how confident are you that you actually know what they want the workplace to look like and what they need or want from places that they're going to buy from? Right now, the way that companies try to adapt is basically a guessing game and a much delayed, often misinterpreted and muffled game of telephone. And for those who don't know, telephone is a game where you tell somebody a message, you whisper it in their ear, and they tell the next person and the next person. And by the end, you see if the ultimate message that you received is anything like the original message. And often it gets mixed up along the way. It's not a very reliable way to relay a simple message, let alone create a strategy. But that's essentially what we're doing. We're playing telephone when we rely on industry-wide reports, on ranks and ranks of managers to relay the message all the way up to their higher ups, and company surveys. If I told you that your workforce was in jeopardy of being cut in half or your revenue would drop by 20%, would your leaders leave your strategy up to word of mouth, employee surveys, and an industry report? So why are we doing this when it comes to preparing the workplace and preparing leaders for our companies to lead in the future? This is why even Harvard Business Review is recommending that organizations and leaders find out what tomorrow's stars want from you as an organization if you want to attract, retain, and develop them. And they said that this would be key to future-proofing your organization. So now we're going to jump into exactly how Dream Mentoring can help you do that, how they can help you overcome challenges, adapt, and innovate faster to meet your customers and your employees' needs. So again, coming back to Dream, I'm going to take a breath because I just shared a lot of statistics, a lot of information. So I want to give you a moment to digest and a moment for me to take a sip of water. But take a look at this again and start thinking about Dream Mentoring, what you've just heard, and why it might be valuable for your organization or you as an individual at this point in your own journey. And I want to point out here again that when we talk about reverse mentoring, we don't just mean younger. We don't just mean Gen Z and millennials mentoring Gen X and baby boomers. In the programs that I've run, we've had amazing relationships where a senior leader who was a millennial was mentored by an HR business partner who was Gen X and learned so much from them. And it was incredibly helpful. So I'm not just saying that we just need to listen to younger generations and that they have the answers. I'm saying we need to partner together and share what we know and share what we value to make a stronger organization. And I also want to point out that this is in this relationship, we're also not just talking about sharing cultural information. We're not talking about employees being used as cultural encyclopedias. That would be to dilute the idea and to, kind of betray the trust and the value of so many of these employees. It's also a lot about the strategic value that these individuals bring to the organization, highlighting that and giving them a chance to be part of the solution to get exposure to others. And we're gonna talk about that more. But I also want to mention that diversity, it's so much more than gender, age, and race. And I know these are the things that we typically think of. They're the things that kind of get the biggest spotlight, and they're absolutely important in the way that we look at making decisions, but they're just a small part of the great diversity that exists. So here are some other things that you could think about when you think about, geographic location, ability, nationality, veteran status, parental or caregiver status, languages. And again, each of these in and of itself has so many additional layers. For example, disability encompasses a wide range of abilities. Some are invisible and some are physical. Some are a combination of physical and mental. And when you look at, education level, highest education level, there's also great diversity. Two people can have a college education, but one person may be a non-traditional student who got it later in life and may not have had the same academic opportunities when they came into the workplace or just growing up. And so each of these, there's not just, you can't just dilute it into a couple of different options and say like, okay, yes, this person is diverse, because obviously you're also comparing it to whatever the majority is where you are. But I want to just call this out as we go forward, that there are so many elements of diversity, and within the different elements, there's also such a wide range of how people come to that background, that experience, or what they bring and their unique story to how they got here, how that's impacted them as an individual. All right, so now that we have that foundation, let's talk about what exactly I mean by diverse, equitable, actionable mentoring. So again, diverse, we just covered a bit of that. It's more than age, race, gender. It includes socioeconomic status, education, caregiving, neurodiversity. There's so much there. So it's really about identifying, looking at your organization, your leadership, whatever it is, and trying to understand what voices are not in the room, who do we consider and consult when we make important decisions, and who is not represented, and how do we make sure that we are creating a space where those voices are not just represented, but these people are given the power and the opportunity to have influence and to actually be able to, be a part of that corporate fabric. Reverse, again, it's not just younger, it's also more junior. Equitable, we want the programs should be promoting equity through the mentee's actions, so through the leader's actions, through the mentor's benefits and opportunities, and through shifts in the culture as a result of these relationships of this program. Actionable, the mentoring outcomes have to go beyond knowledge acquisition into action, into improving the individuals as well as the organization. It's not enough, we would always say, this isn't just a check the box activity for leaders to come in, sit down and listen to someone for an hour and then go about their business. It's about taking that action, reflecting on the way that they work, their processes, their teams, the people they surround them with, and challenging themselves to say, okay, what am I missing? How can we be doing this better? How can we be expanding what it means to work here, what strategy means, what opportunities we pursue? And then mentorship, obviously, all of this is around mentorship, building these meaningful relationships where trust and vulnerability can create true change. And again, all of this with the goal to build a better now and a better future. I think a lot of times when you look at how companies are pursuing, to improve their diversity, equity, and inclusion, for good reason, that's going to be a long journey, and it will have to be. And we wanted to create an opportunity for you to create that succession path, you to empower leaders today who will come into these opportunities in the future, or come into them hopefully a lot faster than they might have, but also an opportunity for your organization, your current leaders, to understand and make changes right now, and your culture to get better now as it builds those stepping stones for the future. And so a few ways that we've seen this used, and there's many more than this, but we've seen it used to learn technology, collaboration, innovation skills, to understand how technology and, for example, AI is at times inherently biased because of how it's created, or just the assumptions that are put into the logic underneath it, and having conversations around how that does impact, the way that you're making decisions. If you're using AI, if you're using analytics, taking a deeper look at how you're making those decisions and how your technology is set up. For general insight on the organization, how different levels of your organization perceive changes that you're making, and the real reactions that they're having, the real concerns that they're having, and making sure that those are getting a voice. Building relationships and trust with the front line. We know that as people go higher in their career, they get further and further out of touch with the other levels in the organization. And so we want to provide opportunities to bridge that gap, and for even the highest level executive to get an understanding of what it looks like to work at the company as an entry-level employee, as a frontline employee, and try to understand that perspective and how the decisions that they're making that might seem layers and layers away are impacting these individuals. Additionally, a great opportunity for dream mentoring, a great kind of side benefit is to retain great talent. When people are invited to become part of the solution, as so many millennials and Gen Z and just individuals want to be, they're a lot more likely to stay at the organization when they believe that there's opportunities for them to grow and to make an impact. Empowering those future leaders, giving them connections, exposure, access to sponsorship has a huge benefit, not just for those individuals, but for your succession pipeline and accelerating innovation. But that's all nice to say. So does it actually work? So here are 4 different companies who have used reverse mentoring specifically. At LabCorp, again, we did reverse and diverse mentoring, which was the foundation to then launch dream mentoring and this concept. But I want to show you how companies have used this in real ways to make impact. So executives at GE in the 90s were able to stay ahead of the competition by using reverse mentoring as a way for their leadership to learn about the new technology of the day, which was the internet. And as you can imagine, that had a huge impact on how quickly they were able to advance, and how ahead of the curve they were in terms of leveraging the internet for marketing, for its technology, for attracting customers. And so that's one example of using it from that technological standpoint. BNY Mellon, one of their branches, used it as a tool to increase the number of millennials they were able to attract and then retain those millennials at a time when millennials did not want to work for, financial services, especially during and after the recession. There was a lot of wariness. And so they used it as a way to better understand what millennials were looking for and then adapt their own value proposition. And they actually retained 96% of the millennials who were involved. At Estee Lauder, they used it as a way to modernize their consumer experience, which was heavily dependent on, which hadn't really changed since, I don't know, in decades. And the CEO said that they used it because they'd come to a point when the past could no longer inform the future. And so for them, this was a key way to attract more young consumers, to stay relevant, to expand their marketing and branding activities so that they didn't just get lost in the shuffle of all the new brands that were coming out, all the new opportunities for consumers. And then at LabCorp, so we used it for our succession pipeline. We used it as a way to, again, for leaders to understand their impact and help them understand. In different cases, we had executives from the C-suite and their direct reports when we started, and we doubled the program every year, going an additional layer into the organization. And what we found was leaders were taking more active roles in pursuing diversity in clinical trials, going from a role where diversity in clinical trials was a nice thing to say, it was a good talking point, but they didn't really understand why it was so important for people, all kinds of people, to actually get access to healthcare. And this might seem basic and obvious, but being able to have those one-on-one relationships and have an executive go from, okay, this is a metric that we track because diversity in clinical trials, we need to track it for, internal purposes and or clients, going from that standpoint to actually being a leader, looking at actively partnering for, okay, how are we going to expand this? How are we going to make sure that we're getting more and more diversity? What resources are we putting towards this, and putting more resources towards it? So having those real outcomes, as well as we saw that more than 60% of our diverse mentors, who were those young leaders, were promoted within the year. And so promotion and retention was a huge thing that we looked at for this program in terms of how are we helping the mentors as well as the organization. All right. So let's talk about your organization. So as you've seen, there's a lot of reasons why this is valuable at this point in time. There's a lot of ways organizations have used reverse mentoring or reverse mentoring with that view of diversity and that intentionality behind it to move their company forward. But what does this mean for you? As Jodi mentioned at the beginning, there's no one size fits all. And I don't want anyone to think, I'm not under the illusion that dream mentoring is going to work for everyone. It's very dependent on your organization, the leaders you have, where you are in your journey on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it takes a lot of intentionality. So when you're thinking about dream mentoring, a few things to think about are what your business objectives are now and in the future. One of the things that we did first when we were developing the reverse diverse mentoring program at LabCorp was look at our business objectives and say, if we want to get executives on board, we know that we're going to have to come at this not just from the HR perspective, but from the business perspective. So what are our goals, and what are we currently missing that our staff actually has the skills, the talent, the experiences for that we're not taking advantage of and we're not leveraging because we have blinders on. So what are those business objectives and how do they relate to your diversity and equity and inclusion goals, your talent management goals, and the people that you have? Where is your organization, again, in that DEIB journey? What does diversity look like at your organization? Reflecting on all those elements that I shared earlier, and there's many more, that's not an exhaustive list, but looking at that and looking at your leadership or the department you're in, whoever you're designing this for, what voices are overrepresented and what are underrepresented? Does your employee base reflect your consumer base? And if it does, that's great, but are you accessing those insights and that perspective when you make decisions at all levels of your organization? And what voices, oh, I already did that one, I got so excited. But again, really asking yourself about those over and underrepresented voices. And so here are some things that we want to call out to consider. First and foremost, do not force participation. That's not going to work for anyone. You're going to put your mentors in jeopardy of a really, really possibly harmful relationship. And you should be taking every precaution to make sure that this is a psychologically safe space for those mentors, especially as they're coming into a power dynamic that is very different. So there's a lot that we recommend doing and that we do in order to prepare both parties, both the mentors and the mentees, for this relationship and to create that psychological safety. But at the very core, the best thing you can do is not force participation. Consider what your mentor compensation and or benefits are. So if you're leaning on mentors who, let's say, are from marginalized communities, which this is a diverse mentoring program, so a lot of those mentors may be, make sure that you're not, again, just using them as cultural encyclopedias, that you're not expecting them to do all the work to educate your executives. Your executives should be learning about diversity, equity, and inclusion in other ways. And it should be something that you consider when you're building your training. Don't just throw them to the wolves, if you will, and tell them, okay, now, it's your job to educate these leaders. The leaders have a responsibility to be learning on their own before, during, and after these relationships. So make sure that you are considering that and you're considering what tangible opportunities, what tangible benefits you're giving to your mentors who are taking this additional time out of their workday to help the organization, help the leaders in this way.
Mary, can I chime in real quick?
Yeah, please.
I think in that mentor compensation and benefits conversation, it's also important to think if you're using frontline employees or frontline employees have a volunteer to participate in this and they are hourly paid, non-exempt employee or exempt employees, non-exempt employees, make sure that you are creating the structure that they are being adequately compensated for the time that they're committing to this, because it is over and above and beyond their normal hourly duties. And then I think the other thing to think about when you're talking about the leaders getting learning in other areas, they can do that in other forums throughout your organization and other programs that you have. But as you're designing this mentoring program, you can be very intentional about the focus areas and activities and topics that you are giving throughout the structure of this. Is a more formal program than some other programs where it's more informal about career development, et cetera. And so as you're planning those topics and activities and giving those leaders trainings and learnings to participate in outside of the relationship, that they can come back in and have a conversation within the relationship about what they learned and how they're going to apply those learnings is something that can be effective as well. And so as you're designing the program, be cognizant of that along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jodi, for adding that. Yeah, very good advice. And with that, as Jodi said, you want to make sure that you are being intentional about everything that you're doing with the program, but also intentionally communicating the program across the entire organization. So I think sometimes we think we just need to communicate these programs to the people who will be involved, but obviously you learn about something going on in the organization, you're curious, you might have a reaction, you might wonder why this is happening. Is this just happening to benefit some at the expense of others? Diversity, equity, and inclusion is such a complicated, beast of a problem and an opportunity. So making sure that you are intentionally communicating the program throughout the organization and not leaving it up to people's imaginations. And then getting that buy-in and support from a leader, getting a leader who will sponsor it, who will open doors, who will back you up, who will fight for the program and will, continue helping you move forward, is really important. And so the other thing is building with others and those it's for. So many times we might build a program and then we show it to someone and we're like, here you go, aren't you happy? And as an L&D specialist, I can tell you that will not work for anyone. And you really want to build it with the people that it's for and with the people who have the expertise. So partner with your DEI teams, partner with if you have ERGs and they want to partner on it, ask for their advice, bring them into the fold. Also talk to the people who are interested in being mentors and mentees, and make sure that you're designing this program not just for, but also with them, because they'll bring up a lot of considerations and concerns that you may not have thought of. And be transparent about the outcomes, the design, and the expectations that you have. Again, if you expect it to be actionable, tell them that up front. Let the leaders know that they're not just coming here to sit down and be talked to. And then take the time to really select, prepare, and guide participants. That follow through is incredibly important. And that selection process is the first part of making sure that everyone is set up for success. So with that, at the end of the day, I hope you take away that to succeed and to future-proof your organization, we need to learn not just from the people who have come before us, but also from those who are leading alongside and after us. And with that, I'd love to pass it over to Jodi for any questions that you have.
Yeah, if you guys have questions, we have about 15 minutes left. So you can either throw them in the chat and I can communicate them to Mary, or you can feel free to come off mute. We've got a smaller crowd left. Some people had to drop. So feel free to come off mute and ask whatever questions that you have.
Hi, I had a question. This is Lotapo Barker from Pixar. I'm interested to if you could talk a little bit about buy-in in terms of positioning the value of this in terms of leadership and sort of, obviously the investment of time and why this is an important sort of opportunity.
Great question. So the first thing that I would recommend doing is, again, going back to the business objectives that you have. So the first thing that we did is we looked at our organizational, we had 5 business objectives, and we looked at those and kind of mapped them out to where do we think that this program can make an impact on those? How can we help move this forward? So one of the objectives, for example, was to I'm gonna butcher the exact wording, but was basically to increase our effective use of technology and digitalization of our products. And so that was something that when we looked at the population that we also had that were interested, that we had to draw on, we had a lot of strong candidates with a lot of skill sets for, and a lot of unique perspectives. And so that was something that we were able to immediately map and go, okay, this is something that we know that we can highlight as to, you want the organization to go here, this is a great way for you to learn, build up your own competency, and or to think through how we're going to digitalize in a way that's going to support our consumers. And so we wanted to look at what are the leaders going for and how can we align to that. So in addition, talking to the leaders, going to, for example, town halls, going to those leadership meetings and hearing from them what their priorities are, we were able to glean what matters most to them and then work on adapting our pitch, if you will, to those leaders so that we could go in, saying this is the value we can offer you to kind of get their ear. And then we could from there extend it to opening up their minds to there's also all these other benefits that are really important and critical for the organization.
I think a couple other things to look at internally would be just evaluating. Mary had talked earlier about the alignment of your employee base to your consumer base. So if you're in an industry where you have strong alignment between your consumer base and your employee base, generationally, experience-wise, et cetera, that can also be a really powerful motivator for your senior leaders who are probably of older generations to learn, because those folks in the younger generations can more closely relate to your consumer base. This is really important in industries like gaming, where a lot of the consumers are pretty young. The other thing that I would say is look internally at your employee data. What are your employees saying about what it's like to work for the organization? Are there any specific objectives around employee engagement, specific areas where you would want to boost employee engagement? And you can look for insights within that data that can help support your case for doing this type of mentoring, because it can not only help those senior leaders understand how to drive change within the organization and create a better culture, but also can help that employees boost that engagement if those things do in fact happen through this program or other types of engagement activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just thinking about where you could go to find also some of this information, as Jodi said, looking at, if you have employee-wide surveys, things like that. Also talk to your marketing team. They'll have great insights on kind of where you're going, who your competitors are. A lot of people now are competing with a lot of, new types of competition that's coming in through TikTok, through Instagram, through so many different avenues. And so talking to them about what they're seeing, what the vulnerabilities are, talking to potentially your sales team to also say, like, what are the objections you're hearing? What are the things that people are telling you, like, they value more, and how are we adapting or not adapting? So yeah, talking to HR, DEI, sales, marketing, they can give you a lot of good information.
Who else has questions? Anyone else want to come off mute?
I can throw another question out if it's all right. In terms of, so obviously one of the risks is sort of using the employees who are more junior as sort of like sort of mining cultural identity and those sorts of things is a potential risk. Can you talk about maybe preparation or mindfulness and how you sort of reinforce that, possibility in terms of like avoiding that, or sort of setting up those mentors for success in terms of not going in that direction in terms of how they're spending that time with the mentee?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that I think we're always looking at, how can we continue to do it better? So what we've done in the past is, one, again, providing that training at the beginning, setting those expectations, first of all, making mentees, the leaders, aware of that, like they might have natural tendency to want to just pick this person's brain about like their cultural identity and kind of make it all about that, and set the expectation that, hey, just make them aware that this they might have this, and then also explain like why this is not the best use of their time, maybe like in certain cases like definitely not appropriate, all of those things. So educating the executives, and then also we provided training to those mentors in a few different ways. So we had some live training where we would talk about preparing them for this, about how to handle these situations, how to redirect the conversation, how to just on both sides, we had them go through some specific training on communicating across differences, whether cultural or otherwise. And then throughout the program, we also had monthly check-ins with the mentors and with the mentees. And so with the mentors, we would go through that kind of like, okay, let's make sure, has anything come up that you want to talk to the rest of the mentors about? We created a community around the mentors that they could support one another. And then in the following years, we actually had mentor coaches who were prior mentors in the program who could come in and also help them navigate, help them see the challenges that they had and prepare them for those, whether ahead of time or in the moment. So we found it really important to give them that support system, and then always have us readily available to talk to them and make sure they knew like, hey, if there's anything that makes you concerned or uncomfortable, like, we're here and we're building this program because we want you to succeed and it to be also a really positive and empowering opportunity for you. So bring those to us. We want to hear it, and like, there's no feedback that's too small. Bring that to us, and like, we can talk through, we want to hear your feedback. We want to know how we can improve. And so I think setting up those structures was really important, in addition to the training early on that communication, and on, we had some additional diversity, equity, and inclusion training that we collaborated with our DEI team on and gave them ahead of time as well, just to make sure that mentors and mentees were as prepared as they could be.
And I think too, having in that training for the mentees, the executives, having them do some awareness, self-awareness assessments or activities, whether it's cultural awareness, cultural self-assessment, or a network analysis, to have them come in with an idea about, they've spent some time thinking about themselves, how they make decisions, where they're at on their with cultural competency, where are some of their blinders. Doing some of those activities up front can keep that some of those areas that they need to be more self-aware in the front of their mind throughout this experience, and can really try to understand that a little bit for themselves, versus getting 3 months into a 6-month program and then you're realizing that some of these things are going on. So some of those prep activities are really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you,
All
Kate,
right.
everyone.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else have questions?
Great questions, Asafo.
Yep, those are awesome. All right, well, there's the QR code on the screen, so feel free to take a snap of that. We will be sending out the recording of the session, as well as making this deck available to you. Certainly feel free, if you want to chat with us for a 30-minute consultation about your specific needs at your organization. That's the link to do that, and we look forward to talking to you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.